all know, Washington established many precedents that shaped the future of the country all the way to modern day. But what if Washington wasn't unanimously elected and someone else served in his place? What if we didn't have a president to start with? If Washington had not been elected as our first president, the young United States of America would have been left with two of the most powerful men in the Constitutional Convention as candidates, Alexander Hamilton and James Madison.
Both men, at the time, were completely qualified for the position of President of the United States, both believing in the ratification of the Constitution, yet differing in opinion on interpretation and enforcement of it. To Alexander Hamilton, the Constitution was the next step to creating a functional government. He was very insistent on pushing for the ratification of the Constitution, contributing to the movement through his composition of the Federalist Papers. After the ratification of the Constitution, Hamilton would have taken steps to establish a strong national government that would have included the best people, which were young, rich, and white-educated men. Throughout his presidency, his domestic and foreign policies would have been highly influenced by his beliefs in loose constructionalism, meaning the opportunity for a more radical, progressive-like government, where court cases and laws would have been decided and ratified case to case rather than by the book. However, Hamilton's bread and butter lied within his economic plans. Had he been president, Hamilton would have used the federal government to promote trade, manage a national debt, create national banks, and he would have attempted to expand the economy as quickly as possible.
If no president was elected at all, a new form of executive government would have been created. A likely alternative that would be written into the Constitution would be a small parliament that votes and makes decisions that the president would. While this is similar to England at the time, it is likely that no monarch would rise due to the nation's experience with monarchs in the past. Whether or not this parliament would be representative based on population or statehood would be up for debate. This argument could quicken the sectional conflicts that could eventually lead to a civil war, even with a three-fifths compromise. In our progress toward political happiness, my station is new, and if I may use the expression, I walk on untrodden ground. There is scarcely any part of my conduct which may not hereafter be drawn into precedent. George Washington. We are now forming a republican government. Real liberty is neither found in despotism or the extremes of democracy, but in moderate governments. Alexander Hamilton.
After being absent from politics for multiple years, Teddy Roosevelt returned to the political scene in 1912 with the Progressive or Bull Moose Party. This brought him much less success than he was probably expecting and ended up splitting Republican votes between the Bull Moose and Republican candidates and led to a Democratic victory in the form of Woodrow Wilson. What if this election had gone a different way? What if Roosevelt didn't run for a third term, or what if the results had been different? If Roosevelt managed to win the election for his newly established political party, it would have created a three-party political system, which could have expanded to more political parties later. This would yield a much more complex political system for the years to come, and maybe today's political parties would be different. World War I would have passed more or less unchanged, but for different reasons. The United States would have remained isolationist under Roosevelt, as it did with Wilson, and would have likely eventually joined the war. However, Wilson maintained neutrality because of economic reasons and because the war was unpopular at the time. Roosevelt would have tried to stay isolated and neutral for other reasons, focusing on the 3 C's of his platform.
Intervening immediately in World War I would have caused damage to all the tenets of his platform. During his presidency, Tenney became less progressive and more conservative, which applies to this situation. This change of presidential views in office would lead to a disdain among the population, who were largely progressive at the time, and maybe a change of public opinion on the war. The expansion of his big stick diplomacy would also occur under Roosevelt's third term and World War I. The U.S. would have been more active in regulating international actions, and we might have seen an early form of the Eisenhower Doctrine being added to the Constitution alongside America's joining of World War I.
The unforgivable crime is soft hitting. Do not hit at all if it can be avoided, but never hit softly. Theodore Roosevelt.
Had the Republican Party won and Taft been inaugurated, his second term would have been notably similar to his first term, even with the onset of World War I. Taft's passive habits during conflicts would have kept the United States out of World War I unless his administration was prompted to join by alliance contract.
As for Taft and national economics, the United States would have suffered greatly. Taft, being a more conservative president, would have dealt with World War I differently than Wilson had. The decline in trust busting due to the dwindling amount of monopolies left would have continued throughout his second presidency until they disappeared. The gradual ending of trust would have immobilized the American economy and simultaneously stimulated Taft's reduction of tariff costs, which would have discouraged all existing industrial trusts. Taft's belief in a more conservative, self-serving economy would not have made the United States into the machine of production that was witnessed under Wilson. Without the huge stimulation to the economy, the eventual Great Depression would have taken hold of the United States at a much earlier point in time.
I am afraid I am a constant disappointment to my party. The matter of fact is, the longer I am president, the less of a party man I seem to become. William Taft.
Al Gore versus George W. Bush was a very close election. Bush became president after that election, but lost the popular vote. This particular presidency was a crucial one in American history, with events such as 9/11 and the war in Iraq occurring during this time period. If the Gore versus Bush election had turned out differently, our country might be in a different place than it is now. But what if Al Gore had become our next president? If so, his policies would have differed from Bush's. Gore did not support the war in Iraq or the government funding of Saddam Hussein. Gore as president would have made decisions that would have led us away from the war in Iraq. His first reaction after 9/11 would not have been to declare war, but he would have handled things less drastically, for example by putting tighter restrictions on technology. And if we were to go to war under Gore, he wouldn't have restricted our civil liberties. Gore was big on making higher education affordable for families across the country. He wanted to increase the amount of student loans and grants given out. Gore was also supportive of the gay community and partnerships, but he didn't support marriage titles. Our democracy has been hacked now. It's pathetic how our system is not working today. Al Gore.